I am a photographer who lives in Rose Valley, Pennsylvania. My name is Carl Finkbeiner. In the first two parts of this series, I began a story about Rose Valley, how its history has flowed along a pattern of abandoned industrial buildings being found by artists during the arts and crafts movement in the early 1900s. The Rose Valley Association, founded by Will Price, created an explosion of activity in Rose Valley for the 10 years it lasted. Then in 1916, Will Price passed away. Arts in Rose Valley became less focused on arts and crafts. Despite those setbacks, Rose Valley continued to flourish artistically and socially because so many creative souls stuck around. The pattern of abandoned places attracting artists who start vibrant communities continued. Rose Valley had set the stage for its next big developments in the busy decade of the 1920s and then beyond. The Roaring Twenties roared in Rose Valley. There was a surge of community institutions, notably a theater, a swimming pool, a school, and the incorporation of the borough. Let's start with the theater. A young actor named Jasper Dieter from New York decided to take over the Artsman's Hall and make it into a repertory theater, naming it Hedgerow Theater. It survives as the oldest continually operating resident repertory theater in the country. Adult and child community members still participate along with the professionals at Hedgerow. For several years now, one of those children has been my grandson. There are layers of history in this building, if you know to look for it. Many of the artists in the community contributed their efforts to Hedgerow. Perhaps most prominent was a friend of Dieter's, a young artist woodworker from a nearby community named Wharton Esherick. He found a second home in the theater and contributed some remarkable furniture, some sculpture, and this unusual spiral staircase, now removed to the Rose Valley Museum. The plays and buildings of Hedgerow also inspired many of Esherick's phenomenal woodcuts, such as this one. Remember that old swimming hole formed by the dam where Minquist Run emptied into Vernon Run? The land was owned by an artist couple named Yarnall and Eleanor Abbott, who in 1928 donated the land for a community swimming pool and financed it by selling some of Eleanor's paintings. We took our children there when they were little and still occasionally find our way to the pool to cool off and relax with friends. It has been so for generations of kids and their adults. Another part of the web of connections in Rose Valley, this bronze horse, is a casting of one of a pair of carved wooden horses made by Wharton Esherick for Hedgerow Theater. This horse was named Jeter after Jasper Dieter. It stands at the entrance to the school in Rose Valley, which was started in the decade of the 20s, now located down the lane from Thunderbird Lodge. The school is a remarkable place. My children went there, and my wife and I have served variously on the board and in the classroom over many years. Every child is known and loved here. They believe in learning by doing and that rain is not an excuse to stay indoors. There is a reason so many ex-students have sent their children to SRV. Generations of kids have known exactly what to do with the bronze horse. You climb on it. It is a rite of passage for little ones to climb up on Jeter's back unassisted. My daughter brought her son here to climb this horse, just as she had many years before. In times when there are not pandemic lockdowns, this horse gleams from all the children sliding on and off. SRV started a great tradition in its first year, the annual May Fair. Children and their families gather for a day of singing, dancing, games, talking, food, and racing around with friends, mostly without close parental supervision because it is such a safe place. It always feels like a brilliant day, with the delicate new leaves and flowers echoing the young lives being celebrated. The virtual Mayfair of the first pandemic year of 2020 was brave and poignant, especially for those kids whose last year at SRV that was. There is no question, however, that the event will return one day as the vibrant, wide-open community Mayfair of the preceding 90 years. Rose Valley became an official borough of Pennsylvania in that decade of the 1920s. It located its borough office in the space at the old mill where Price's Rose Valley Furniture Shop had been. The tower and some new buildings, designed by Will Price's son Billy and a Walton cousin, were added around this decade while preserving some of the old ruins. It is still owned by the Rose Valley Folk, the community organization established at the beginning of the 1900s. The place is now often used for weddings, a lovely setting, one where our daughter got married. An important way that connections are revealed in Rose Valley is through a network of unmapped paths. They're not always easy to find. Most of them are away from roads and in undeveloped land or running through people's backyards. More than one new resident has been cautioned against unknowingly blocking the paths with plantings or construction. The old mill race from the now broken dam near the pool originally ran down the hill to power Hutton's mill. Today, on the berm next to the overgrown ditch that most people are not even aware was once a mill race, this path connects the physical play of the swimming hole, later the pool, directly to the artistic play at Artsman's Hall, now Hedgerow Theater. I'm charmed that the path is the shortest and fastest way to get from the pool to the theater or back. Fastest, that is, if you do not get lulled and distracted by the lovely, tranquil scenery. Another walking path through the backyards of Rose Valley follows an abandoned trolley track. The old trolley from Media clanked its way into Rose Valley at the old Penn Railroad commuter line, now SEPTA, and continued in a relatively straight line down to what is now the pool. At that point it stopped for travelers and then eventually made its way to Swarthmore and beyond. After the trolley line closed down, the tracks were repurposed as a walking path, with a bridge crossing Minquas Run at the same place as the old tracks used to be. Because of their importance to Rose Valley, most of its paths are cultivated and maintained year after year. This path over the bridge you see here extends from the trolley path across Minquas Run, spanning it so walkers can avoid soaked, muddy feet. They could have just laid a board across the stream. It's not wide or deep here after all, but that was not good enough. Something graceful and more permanent was wanted. And so they built this bridge as a memorial to Will Price shortly after his death, designed by his son, Billy Price, and built by his cousin, Herb Walton. You may be wondering, as I did for many years, about the name Minquas. So while you view it here, let me take a moment to explain. Minquas supposedly means treacherous in the language of the Lenni-Lenape Indians who occupied this area before Europeans. It was their derogatory name for the Susquehannock Indians who tried to invade their territory from the west. An 80-mile trading route passing through what is now Rose Valley eventually became known as the Great Minquas Path and was the subject of a state historic marker and bronze sculpture installed here in the 1920s, of course. Sadly, the sculpture was recently stolen, but the Great Minquas Path left its name on this small, not very treacherous-looking tributary of Vernon Run. All of our paths tie together a community that is still evolving while honoring its past. Portions of the paths, like this stairway, have been there for many decades. The effort required to build and maintain them and their bridges signifies how much those paths meant and still mean in connecting Rose Valley. Our institutions and the real and figurative paths and bridges that connect them have established a legacy which I will explore to end this series in Part 4.